April 17th, 2026, a 10-day ceasefire between Lebanon and Israel has just come into effect. After the assassination of Iran's Supreme Guide Ayatollah Khamenei triggered a massive escalation, Lebanon was once again dragged into a devastating war, leaving over 1 million people displaced. Yet beyond the war, Lebanon appears unable to break free from its overlapping internal and external crises. The government has been attempting to address the country's multiple challenges. The obstacles remain immense, from the unresolved issue of Hezbollah's disarmament and its role within the state, to continued interference by external actors, namely Israel and Iran, and enduring economic collapse, and a population exhausted by years of instability. Welcome to Med Insights, the ISPI podcast where we unpack the forces shaping the Middle East and North Africa and what they mean for global politics. I'm Nicola Missaglia, Curator of the Med Mediterranean Dialogues. In this episode, we discuss Lebanon's role in the ongoing regional conflict, with Lina, Khatib, an Associate Fellow at Middle East and North Africa program at Chatam and also a visiting scholar at Harvard's Kennedy School, and Aurélie, Assistant Professor at Paris Dauphine University in France.
And dangerous phase in U.S.-Iran.
Reopen Gaza's southern Rafah crossing with Egypt. Turkey's foreign minister says attacking Iran
The Middle East. With the Middle East crossed a threshold.
Lina, let's take a step back. Following the October 2024 ceasefire between Israel and Hezbollah, there was a sense that Lebanon might be entering a phase of recovery. So how did Lebanon find itself once again drawn into a regional war?
In November 2024, Israel and Hezbollah agreed to a ceasefire. Israel continued to bomb Lebanon after the ceasefire. However, Hezbollah also broke the terms of the ceasefire by continuing to move its weapons in Lebanon, continuing to move its fighters, and continuing to refurbish weapons to prepare itself for another round with Israel. The Lebanese government has pointed out consistently Israel's own breaking of the terms of the agreement of November 2024. But the big reality is that Hezbollah is also a culprit there. So the period afterwards, for almost a year and 3 months or so, was not actually a period of calm. It was a period of relative calm. However, it was the killing of Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei in Iran that sparked Hezbollah to enter this new war with Iran by attacking Israel first. So throughout the period that I spoke about, Hezbollah was not actually attacking Israel, even though Hezbollah was breaking the terms of the agreement. But it took this bigger step of dragging Lebanon into a new war in response to the killing of Ali Khamenei in the US-led campaign in Iran. And here we can clearly see where Hezbollah's main priority lies.
And where does this priority lie?
If Hezbollah's main priority had been stability in Lebanon, it would not have broken the terms of the ceasefire agreement in the first place. And at the same time, if Hezbollah's main priority had been Lebanon's national interest, it would have listened to the Lebanese government that said that Lebanon wants to stay outside regional wars. So Hezbollah's entrance into this war happened completely against the wishes and orders of the Lebanese government and the Lebanese state. And at the same time, Hezbollah wants effectively to hold Lebanon hostage in this situation because it is consistently refusing to stop its military campaign against Israel in the current course of the war. And therefore, Hezbollah is effectively conveying the message that its ultimate loyalty, and I would go as far as say only loyalty at the moment, is to Iran, even though it pretends that it is a Lebanese so-called resistance actor.
So it wasn't a real de-escalation of the conflict, but a more calculated pause. What do you think about that, Aurélie?
The problem is this. In my opinion, not enough people, whether in the West or even actually within the Lebanese institutional milieus, listened to very important declarations that were repeatedly made by the Hezbollah leadership. Hezbollah was very clear. Their reasoning was thus. They explained that for a year or a year and a half, they were going to retreat themselves both from the battlefields and from the center of the institutional life till the elections, the legislative elections that were supposed to actually happen this year in the spring. And they said, if in a year and a half, the Lebanese army is still not capable of defending the territory, if the Israelis are still attacking Lebanon, because the government was all about, we don't need military action against Israel, diplomatic channels are enough. So Hezbollah was said, okay, let's see how this works. But if in a year and a half from now, you don't have serious results, then we will be back in the saddle. And that's exactly what happened, unfortunately.
Now, after the 2024 Pages attack and the killing of Hezbollah's longtime leader Hassan Nasrallah, there was also a feeling that Hezbollah had been significantly weakened. But the wave of attacks the group has perpetuated against Israel has shown a much stronger military capacity than expected. Aurélie, how would you assess Hezbollah's actual strength today?
If we want to really to efficiently answer the question how strong Hezbollah is today, we need to remember first that Hezbollah is a twofold organization. Okay, there's the military part, what we call al-Muqawama al-Islamiyya fi Lebanon, right, the Islamic resistance in Lebanon, and then there's the civil part of the organization, which includes the political apparatus, the communication apparatus, everything related to social action, kind of related institutions. The civil part of Hezbollah is doing okay, I would say, relatively. I mean, in spite of the differences that the political leadership has with the Lebanese government, their MPs still sit in parliament, they still have their say in parliament, and the ministers are still in the government. Now, the military, the Islamic resistance that I mentioned earlier is somehow the surprising element of the equation.
At the same time, Lebanon is at the heart of a broader regional dynamics and external interference, and it's quite impossible to talk about Hezbollah without mentioning its relationship with Iran. Now, has this relationship been affected by the dynamics you have just described?
In terms of like the essence of the relationship between the Iranians and Hezbollah, no, it hasn't changed, it hasn't weakened. In a way, the Iranians know that they owe Hezbollah, okay, for everything they did that helped the Iranians, the whole fight within the axis of resistance, the sacrifices by Hezbollah, by the Lebanese population for the sake, even if explicitly, implicitly, but at the end of the day, to the benefit of the Iranians, that the Tehran does recognize that. They don't, so they know that they cannot abandon, just like that, Hezbollah and the Lebanese. And that's why, by the way, one of the points of negotiation that were put on the table by the Iranians when they started their negotiations with the Americans, Lebanon was one of the main points. On the Lebanese side, we had, at the very beginning of the ceasefire, end of 2024, I would say, a moment where quite a lot of Lebanese, including Shia, were a little bit pissed at the Iranians because they considered that the Iranians didn't do enough, basically, well, first of all, to preserve their organization and most importantly, to protect Hassan Nasrallah. But after a while, and especially since the beginning of the war between Iran on one side and Israel and the US on the other side, the sympathy and the support of Hezbollah, the Shia, but also another part of some of Lebanese who are not Shia, for Iran basically came back, was back in the saddle.
And we're also seeing just how central Lebanon is for Iran in these ceasefire talks with the United States. There's been quite a bit of confusion, in fact, over whether Lebanon was actually part of the agreement. Iran has insisted that it is, while both Israel and Washington have said the opposite. Lina, help us unpack this. What is really going on here?
Lebanon has been a very important component of the war between Israel and Iran. Iran regards Lebanon as a card in its hands. It wants to use this card to put pressure on Israel. So in a way, Lebanon is a bit like Iran's use of trying to block the Strait of Hormuz and Iran's own use of missiles. And because Hezbollah is Iran's most influential proxy and the oldest and most established, it's not going to be easy at all to imagine a scenario in which Iran will simply give up on Hezbollah. It does not want to lose this leverage. And so some were expecting that perhaps Iran might just go to negotiations while abandoning the Lebanon file. But that has not happened. Although Iran did go to negotiations to Islamabad, at the same time, it kept sending explicit messages saying, we will not leave Lebanon. Now, this is not about supporting Lebanon. This is about abandoning a very important leverage card for Iran. So this is not a positive statement for Lebanon at all, because it is a statement challenging Lebanon's sovereignty.
If Lebanon finds itself squeezed between pressure from Iran and Israel, then another key player is, of course, the United States. Washington has been deeply involved, brokering the ceasefire, but also remaining a central actor in the broader confrontation with Iran. Lina, what role is the United States really playing today? Can it still influence Israel, support Lebanon, and at the same time act as a credible mediator in all of this?
Only the US can pressure Israel, and only the US can actually protect Lebanon. Lebanon needs the protection and Israel needs the support. And ultimately, the US cares about Israel's security. And this is one of the big reasons why Israel is leading this campaign against the regime in Iran. The idea behind the current campaign against Iran is to eliminate the threat posed by the Iranian regime to Israel. And therefore, Lebanon is part of this equation because for as long as Hezbollah forms a threat to Israel, Israel will never have peace with Lebanon. And so the US definitely has Israel's security as a priority. But at the same time, the US recognizes that currently there is a new political landscape in Lebanon that can steer the situation in the Middle East towards greater stability. And so it is in the US interest not to undermine the current government in Lebanon vis-a-vis Israel. So what I'm saying is that there has to be compromise on both sides, Israel and Lebanon, and only the US can broker such a compromise.
And after all, it is Washington that helped broker the ceasefire between Israel and Lebanon. To unpack what this agreement really means and where its limits lie, I spoke with Luigi Toninelli, researcher at ISPI.
The news of ceasefire between Israel and Lebanon is certainly very positive, as it is allowing a partial return of displaced people to what remains of their homes and a first effort to clear and repair infrastructure heavily damaged by the war. The ceasefire is also a diplomatic victory for President Aoun because although Hezbollah claims it is the result of Iranian pressure on Washington, the presidency has managed to achieve the first objective of its diplomatic plan towards Israel, and was able also to avoid a phone call with Netanyahu that could have been exploited by the different parties involved in the conflict. However, there is still widespread mistrust among the Lebanese population about whether this ceasefire can actually lead to an end of the conflict, and many fear that attacks could continue even in the coming days. We must acknowledge that attacks from both sides have continued in recent days, and it's clear that the negotiation will go ahead under the bombs. But this mistrust is also tied to the issue of Hezbollah's disarmament, which will be difficult to implement as long as there is an Israeli presence on Lebanese territory. For this reason, dialogue between Lebanon and Israel alone isn't enough, nor is a disarmament plan handed over to the Lebanese armed forces, especially given the LAF's largely non-confrontational nature, which make it hard to imagine Beirut actually disarming Hezbollah by force. These days, people are even talking about Hezbollah's disarmament that would start in the north and move to the south, the exact opposite of what happened so far. This could be an idea, but dialogue still needs to happen alongside it. There's also need to be engagement with Hezbollah itself, maybe by embedding the disarmament in a broader political framework that reassure the Shia community it won't be sidelined within Lebanon's complex system. This might be the only way to conceive them to give up their weapons. Also, to make progress, it would require thinking outside the box and recognizing that the occupation fuels and legitimizes the rhetoric of resistance. For example, one possible approach, despite its limitation, could be to reverse the sequence. First of all, define all the borders by making concession to Beirut to delegitimize the resistance narrative, and then negotiate a withdrawal from the already occupied territory in exchange for Hezbollah's disarmament. I think that only through dialogue can disarmament be achieved, and the use of force alone will lead nowhere.
And yet attacks continue even under the ceasefire, as United Nations personnel even is being targeted.
Attacks against UNIFIL are new. Just 3 days ago, 3 Indonesian peacekeepers were killed in attacks carried out by Israel. At the same time, Hezbollah is no stranger to targeting UNIFIL either. Just think of the killing in 2022 of an Irish peacekeeper by the members of the Party of God. But beyond the need to condemn all the attacks of this kind, when it comes to Hezbollah's action and the death of the French peacekeeper, it's interesting to ask why this attack happened. It's worth nothing that the group certainly doesn't appreciate the UN mission, and at the same time part of the local population sees UNIFIL as an occupying force, or at least as ineffective. This lack of trust has led and continues to lead to sporadic action against peacekeepers and their convoys. However, in this specific case, it seems that the increasingly horizontal command structure adopted by Hezbollah, along with the growing independence of its units and battalions in recent times, has made individual units freer and therefore harder for the military leadership to control, and even less so for the political leadership. On top of that, the group contains different internal factions, which in recent months have also come into a sort of competition with each other. In short, targeting UNIFIL seems more like a sign of weakness than strength. Now, we could open a much broader discussion about UNIFIL's role, but maybe this isn't the right moment. Still, let me say this. Even if it has proven ineffective when it comes to disarmament, simply monitoring the situation in times like this can act as a safeguard and a restraint against lawlessness.
Now, the Lebanese government seems to be in a very difficult position right now, and yet we've also seen a notable shift in its stance towards Hezbollah since the latest escalation. Early on, it even took the unprecedented step of declaring Hezbollah's actions illegal and calling for a halt to both its military and political activities. So, what does this tell us about the relationship between Hezbollah and the Lebanese state today?
There's actually a trust issue, a major trust issue between Hezbollah and the government, okay, or at least a part of the government. I'm going to depict the Hezbollah representations of the government here. Prime Minister Nawaf Salam is seen as someone who's not legitimate, in the sense that he was forced onto the Lebanese by the US and Saudi Arabia, but he was not the Lebanese first choice, and obviously was not Hezbollah's first choice. And then the way Hezbollah sees it is that also Nawaf Salam is too influenced by the far-right parties, starting with what we call the Party of the Lebanese Forces, seen as way too much influential within the government. And Hezbollah sees the Lebanese forces as a remnant of the brutal collaborationist militia that was active during the civil war. Okay, so in the eyes of Hezbollah's leadership, the government presents two issues. It's not legitimate, and it follows first and foremost an Israeli agenda. And finally, there's another problem, which is, according to Hezbollah, but also part of the Lebanese Shia, is the government showed way too little interest in addressing the disarray of the south under Israeli attack. So the government is reproached with not taking enough care of the refugees, and some ministers even made declarations that were seen, or at least sounded, offensive for the refugees, for the displaced in general, and for the Shia community in particular.
And beyond the tensions between Hezbollah and the state, it's really the Lebanese population that is paying the highest price. As Israeli bombardments continue, displacement from the south and across the country is fueling concerns about rising sectarian tensions. Some are even warning of the risk of a renewed civil war. So how realistic is this scenario? And are we looking at the early signs of a deeper internal conflict or something different?
Yes, well, some people have been talking, yes, quite a lot in Lebanon. Politicians, journalists, experts, about the risk of a civil war. Personally, and I really hope I'm not wrong, I don't believe in a civil war in Lebanon anytime soon. Now, mind you, I don't exclude episodes of civil violence, but civil violence is not yet civil war. First, it takes two to tango. And at the end of the day, in Lebanon, apart from the far right that I was mentioning earlier, so the Party of the Lebanese Forces, no one wants a civil war in Lebanon. No one, thank God. Second, a civil war is a violence dynamics that spreads in time. You need time for that violence to qualify, okay, and to be described, depicted officially as a civil war. You need a kind of violence at a high intensity for months, maybe for a year, maybe for more than a year, before everyone can officially say, okay, this is a civil war. So paradoxically, while some people are saying the Israelis are trying, for instance, by bombarding Lebanese infrastructures, the state, Christians, even friendly groups in Lebanon, pro-Israeli groups, they're trying to trigger a civil war in Lebanon and have the Lebanese do the work that they cannot do on the ground. I think that is, if that's really what the Israelis have in mind, it's a huge strategic mistake, because at the end of the day, that's gonna maybe accelerate exactly the opposite, which is a total victory of the Shia community, a total overcome of the Shia community over the institutions, and basically an exclusion of all the adversaries of Hezbollah outside the political game. Just finish on an optimistic note, because we said so many harsh things and horrible things. So yes, and maybe then to finish on a more optimistic note, while quite a lot of people are worried about a potential civil war, I find that media and experts alike actually do not talk enough, a contrario, about the solidarity that we have also been watching between the Lebanese. People of different sects opening their houses, reorganizing their houses everywhere in Lebanon to shelter their compatriots in need. And it's not just Shia, by the way, who are on the streets, because we tend to see either the south of Lebanon or the Bekaa Valley or Dahiya, the southern suburbs of Lebanon, as only Shia. No, they're very diverse community-wise, sectarian-wise. So the displaced are Shia, but they're also Sunnis, Christians of all kinds. So yes, we do have tension in some areas, but we also have quite a lot of solidarity too.
Thank you, Aurélie, for highlighting that important dimension of solidarity. And yet, despite this resilience within Lebanese society, the impact of the conflict on civilians remains extremely severe. We saw that clearly with the devastating Israeli attacks on April the 8th, which killed nearly 400 people and injured more than 1,100. Lina, how do you assess the scale of these attacks and their broader implications?
The Israeli attacks on Lebanon on April 8 were the largest of Israel's attacks on the country since 1982, when Israel invaded Lebanon. The scale of devastation exceeded that of the port explosion of August 4, 2020. And even though Israel claimed that it was protecting civilians in the course of its action against Hezbollah, the numbers show something very different. Israeli estimates say that between 180 and 220 Hezbollah operatives were killed in that campaign. When you look at the overall number of casualties, we see that almost twice as many have been killed, which shows that probably for every Hezbollah operative killed, there was another innocent Lebanese killed. And then you look at the number of injured people, more than 1,000. And the ratio of civilian devastation to Hezbollah operatives killed becomes really huge. And this is not something that any European or international government can ignore. I don't think anyone has any sympathy for Hezbollah in this war, unless we are talking about Iran, of course. But when it comes to the killing of civilians in this way, the huge number of innocent people and the mass devastation that has happened as a result of this attack on April 8th, this goes beyond anything that any decent government anywhere in the world regards as acceptable. And I think that day caused a transformation in the approach of several European and other countries to Israel's actions in Lebanon, and underlined why there needs to be a way out of this conflict to minimize this kind of devastation to civilian lives. And I think this kind of political pressure played a role in Israel finally accepting Lebanon's offer to enter direct negotiations with Israel. However, the fact that Israel has agreed shows that even Israel itself is aware of what it did on April 8th and how damaging this is for Israel's own standing in the international community. And it is very important here to hold everyone accountable in this conflict. And so right now, there has to be accountability applied to Hezbollah, but at the same time, accountability applied to Israel for its own activities in Lebanon as well. So I think the ultimate help for Lebanon internationally would be to apply accountability equitably to all warring actors.
Lebanon today remains caught at the crossroads of regional rivalries and deep internal fragility. The ceasefire is, of course, welcome news for Lebanon and for the wider region, but the fragile foundations on which it rests highlight just how volatile the situation remains, especially for Lebanese citizens. The humanitarian cost is becoming increasingly hard to ignore, with civilians bearing the brunt of a crisis that still shows no clear path to resolution. As we wait to see whether diplomatic efforts can move beyond symbolic gestures and deliver concrete results, a key question remains. Can the Lebanese state reclaim a meaningful role in shaping its own future? We will continue to follow these developments and their implications for the region and beyond. Editorial support and production by Sarah Isabella Laikin, Luca Puzzangara, and Eleonora Marciani. If you enjoyed this episode, follow the Med Insights podcast on all major platforms. For more analysis and updates, visit med.ispionline.it. Thank you for listening.